In this scenario, Daniel, 65, and Julia, 62, have 500,000 and want to know if they can retire, and if so, how. The good news is that the average retirement savings here from 65 to 74 is just north of $600,000. So when you include their home and the Social Security that they're going to be getting, they're actually a little bit ahead. So this is doable. We're going to break this up into 3 different steps. First is going to be defining their goals. From there, we're going to see how much that actually costs. And finally, we can run some tests. Let's get into it. So we're going to split up their goals into 2 different categories here. So we have our foundational goals on the left. These are going to be kind of your non-negotiables, your humbler lifestyle. You might even, depending on how you want to break things up, break this down into just your bare survival goals. On the left, we have our more high-end goals, something that's a little bit more ambitious. So we have 1 vacation abroad every single year, and we ran that in this case for 10 years straight. After that, taking that out. Then we have traveling to see their son out of state twice per year for the next 20 years, and then going out to eat more 3 times per week with their family, community, etc. I'll show how we factor that in later on just by increasing the monthly expenses. And then the foundational goals for this couple are just live cheaply in an inexpensive area. Keep in mind, this is just, hey, if we could retire right now and we just had to do these things, we want to see if that's possible. So for fun, going on walks, spending time with family, going to the movies, reading books, pray, etc. Get more involved in their church, be present for their grandkids. And this is something that a lot of people do. It's not necessarily talked about as much nowadays, but when one spouse passes, being willing to move in with children, and the children are receptive to that, and having their grandkids or their children's children help out with taking care of them. Again, this is something that would help with living costs later on, and also with any sort of long-term care expenses. So we have the clear, humble picture of what that lifestyle would look like, and then a clearer picture on the higher end goals, a little bit more ambitious. So the key idea here, get a clear picture of those so we can work backwards. Now that we have that, let's move in to the expenses, calculating them for both scenarios. So first, you can see in the top right, we're going to work with the foundational goals because all of these expenses are still going to be there, maybe tweaked a little bit, but for the higher end goals. So we're going to start with the foundation. This doesn't include property tax, property insurance, maintenance costs, and health costs. We do include that in both of the projections that we run later in this video, but this number here, this 2,200 number, does not include that. And keep in mind, this couple also has a paid off home that they're living in, so there's no rent factored in here as well. There will be, again, that property tax, insurance, maintenance costs, etc. in the calculations, but not in this 2,200 number. So you can see they went down and broke out auto and transport, including auto insurance, bills and utilities, charitable giving, dining out, entertainment, groceries, health and fitness, gifts every single month, and miscellaneous shopping. Obviously, for you, these numbers might look much different. Maybe they're less, maybe they're a whole lot more, and you think that there's no way this is even livable. This is just for this couple. Now we have a little breakdown of their net worth on the right. So this shows $565,000. Now when I said $500,000, I'm actually not including the property. This is mainly just talking about this $250,000 in investments in a 401k, $15,000 in a bank, and then this annuity here they bought with $250,000. That gives them joint income, in this case, starting immediately for $18,000 a year for the rest of their life. So if one of them passes, the other one is going to continue to get that until they both pass away. And then we have both, not only Daniel's, but Julia's Social Security as well that we're going to estimate out. So this net worth is technically $250,000 higher if you include the price before they bought the annuity, and it's not including the $300,000 is when you're talking about the total $500,000 of income. So again, the idea here is calculating the bare minimum expenses for that humbler scenario so you can run projections and see how achievable that is, and then hopefully find a middle ground between them if you need to. Maybe the higher end goals you'll find out is, wow, we can do that. We don't even need to find a middle ground. We're definitely good to go. So that is the retirement expenses for the foundational goals. Now, let's look at the high end goals. So these are the things we're adding in. We're keeping everything else static, except we're adding these in. So 1 vacation abroad every single year. We have that at $3,500 for the next 10 years. Again, this could be much more expensive. You might be thinking that there's no way that's attainable. And also, you have the annual increase on both of these for general inflation. The same thing happens with the expenses. That's because it's not going to be $3,500 this year and the same exact price for the same exact trip 10 years from now, that's going to be increased. So we have accounted for that. So that's the first thing that we have here, that trip once for 10 years. That's, you can see the calendar year we put there at 2036. And then we have the traveling to see kids twice a year because they wouldn't have to pay for living expenses. They'd be able to stay with the kids. Just in their scenario, we put that at $4,000 for that's 2 trips, and that for 20 years. That's where that 2046 comes. And then we increased the monthly expenses for them from $2,200 all the way to $4,000. So we are factoring in a little bit more than just eating out a couple times a week, but that's okay. We really want to overstretch this so we can find a comfortable middle ground, and also want to leave some room for flexibility because maybe they retire, they think $2,200 is totally going to be what they're spending. They think they're going to eat out and it's going to get to $28,000. But things come up. They want to buy more gifts. They want to be more charitable. We want to make sure we have some flexibility for that. Now, again, idea here, calculating the maximum expenses for an ambitious scenario so we can run projections to see how achievable each is. Now, here is the projection for the first. This is the foundational goals. You notice right away the probability of success on the right is 100%. So this includes property tax, property insurance, maintenance costs, health costs, but one of the reasons this is going to be 100% success is because we had that scenario where they're fine with natural death. They're not doing anything for long-term care insurance in this. They just had the one, after the first one passes, moving in with the family and having them take care of them until they pass away. You might not be okay with that. Again, this is the humblest scenario that we ran. So that's the note there on the right, assuming living with kids and okay with natural death. On the left, we have, or on the top rather, we have an optimal withdrawal from Social Security. So of course, in that case, that's just going to be delaying it the longest for the husband. Julia did not work, so she gets a portion of the husband. So it's best for her to just take it right at full retirement age. So at age 67, at least in terms of optimally how much money you're going to receive. And that you can see you're going to use some of that investment income early up, at least in this projection. And then we also had, if they would rather delay that out farther and not really want to rely on that as much and just take Social Security as early as possible, we ran that as well. Both of them, 100% of income is stable. There's no income shortage. The only thing to keep in mind, and I touch on this later, is there is still the hyperinflation risk. So Social Security does have a cost of living adjustment for inflation, but if the power of the US dollar is much weaker, for example, due to hyperinflation, and Social Security decides to cut the way that they calculate the cost of living adjustment, then there's still a slight risk there. So I'm not going to say this is 100% guaranteed, even though the probability of success from the software is 100%. Next, let's move into the more ambitious scenario. So we know that baseline there we could definitely do right away. The second is going to be a little bit different. So we can see 90% of your income is stable, other is coming from the investment returns. The probability of success with this is much lower. So it's 48%, so it's still doable. And this again does not account for any of that long-term care coverage. Now I do include that in the next slide, which I'll show if you are wanting to include that. We're just running it for this specific couple. But you can see here, if the market had a bad first decade, so that's this bottom one here, you can see the red is the shortage there. So there's a little bit of a shortage. They run out of money in their investment account at age 70 with delaying Social Security that long. And even if they took it earlier, they would still run it. It actually would look a little bit worse than this. That's why I just ran it here. But then you can see the red there is the difference that they would need to be able to continue to maintain this lifestyle. Now this might actually be just okay because there is what is called, and maybe you're familiar, the retirement spending smile, where they're kind of at the beginning of their retirement going to spend this amount that we have projected here. As retirement goes on, they'll kind of start to drop and adjust it for inflation. So it's kind of like a smile. It's going to go like this. The expenses drop a little bit and then they're going to come back up at the end. So if you account for that, you might actually be able to get this probability of success a little bit higher. So this again is accounting for the vacation once a year abroad for the first 10 years, the traveling to see the kids twice a year for 20 years, and the monthly expenses up to $4,000 a month. So this would be pretty exciting to see for this couple. And then finally, we have this does account for long-term care costs for one of the two of them. We did that just by funding an extra $550 a month into perpetuity into a cash value life insurance policy. It's not a long-term care coverage policy. However, they have it to where it's building up and they can access that money tax-free later on. So it's a little bit different than a traditional long-term care policy. However, in this scenario, it's close to covered for one of them. We can see there the probability of success drops pretty drastically down to 10%. And that's just still not that big of a shortage of income in those late years. So if you include that retirement spending smile, this might become less of a problem. Now, if there was a bad first decade in the market, you can see it gets a little bit scarier, and even if we took Social Security earlier, we would still run into actually a much worse scenario. Also, here this is assuming that they're both living this long, so if one of them passes away earlier, maybe their expenses go way down, so this isn't as big of a concern for them. Also, if they do still live with one of their kids and they're able to help out, reduce this long-term care costs, maybe they're even helping out with some of the expenses, with groceries. Again, if they're taking that method, this might be much more doable for them. So, can they retire? The answer, of course, is yes, because we saw that 100% success ratio in the first case. However, there's a couple things that this couple is going to need to keep in mind, and there's more than this as well, but they're going to have to find a middle ground between the two strategies. So the humbler style of living and the more ambitious of going on vacation, going to see their kids twice a year, and accounting for long-term care. The probability of success is there, ranged all the way from 100% to 10%. So maybe they're going to find a middle ground there if retiring early or right now is a big priority to them. Also, they just want to make sure to leave a little bit of wiggle room. I touched on this for unexpected changes, or just willing to be a little bit flexible. If they think, like I said, that the $2,200 a month is totally their baseline, and that's definitely what it is now, that's definitely what it's going to be then, but they get into retirement and an extra $500 comes along, how is that going to affect their probability of success? What happens if one of their children has a big medical expense and they want to help out? Do they go ahead and do that? Can they do that? Also, understand that there are still risks like hyperinflation or serious early market crashes. We did show a bad decade. We didn't show 2008 happening twice in the first 2 years, though, for example. So that could still happen. Perhaps they have some sort of hedge against hyperinflation with a small percentage of this money. And then finally, they're going to have to make the jump at some point. So it just depends, again, what are their goals? What do they want to get out of retirement? Now, their lifespan, they may both be very healthy, may be very long. However, their health span is a little bit different than their lifespan. So essentially, the United States currently has the largest gap, I could be wrong, but it's at least close to it, between the lifespan and health span on average. It's around 12.7 years. That means if they have this picture of what they want retirement to look like, waiting longer may give them more money, which on paper seems like they're going to be able to have a higher probability of success to live that out. However, if they are unhealthy much sooner because they're working more or because they're not getting to be as active or because they just lived longer, then they're not going to have as much of a successful attempt at living out that retirement, because maybe they're going to retire 3 years later, but they only get to travel for 4 or 5 years because at that point, Daniel's health is deteriorating quickly. Just some things to keep in mind. Nothing in this video is advice, just running some scenarios showing what this could look like for them. And hopefully you found this video helpful. If you did, please do subscribe. I release videos like this twice a week, going into much greater detail. And if you would like to see what your own scenario would look like, feel free to drop a comment below. I'd be more than happy to run a video showing this for you. Bye-bye.